the laughter came first. It always did, when Fernanda Lobaton was involved. It rolled through the great hall like a wave breaking over stone, filling every carved corner, rattling against the high windows where the morning light fell pale and indifferent. The notary, a thin man with ink-stained fingers, and the practiced neutrality of someone who had witnessed too many inheritances unravel into cruelty, cleared his throat and read the document again, as though repetition might soften it. It did not. To my daughter, Fernanda Lobaton, I bequeath the eastern parcel, 20 acres bounded by the ridge of broken stones to the north, the dry creek bed to the south, the iron post to the east, and the forgotten road to the west. The laughter swelled. Around the long oak table sat the elders of the Lobaton pack, men and women whose rings caught the light and whose perfumes competed with the dusty air of the reading room. There were cousins who had never spoken a kind word to her, aunts who had passed her in hallways without meeting her eyes, a handful of her father's oldest friends who regarded the Omega girl the way one regards a bird that has wandered into the wrong nest. They wore their finest clothes for the occasion of his death. They always did. Fernanda stood at the far end of the table, her hands folded in her lap, the red of her dress the only warmth in the room. Her white hair, that strange pale inheritance that had always set her apart, that they had always used against her, caught the morning light and made her look, for just a moment, like something that did not belong to this world. Her eyes were the color of still water, neither silver nor gray, holding everything and revealing nothing. She did not flinch. She did not blink. She had learned long ago not to give them the satisfaction. "No herbs grow there," said Cousin Mirabelle, pressing her ring-heavy fingers to her lips, as though to suppress the smile that had already escaped. "Not even grass grows there. Your father left you wind and sand, girl." 20 acres of dust, said old Nathaniel Lobaton, her father's brother, from his seat at the head of the table. He had warm fires in his hearth, marble floors in his house, 3 wells on his land that had never once run dry. He leaned back in his chair and spread his hands wide, a gesture of theatric magnanimity that fooled no one. "We tried to warn Eduardo, God rest him, that the eastern parcel was worthless. Perhaps he meant it as a joke. Perhaps by the end, his mind was not entirely his own." More laughter. Softer this time, more private, traded in glances over the rim of glasses. Fernanda looked at the document in her hands. The paper was old, the ink slightly faded at the edges, but her father's signature was unmistakably his. That careful, deliberate script, each letter formed as though it mattered. Eduardo Lobaton had been a quiet man, a man who chose his silences the way other men chose their words. He had never been one for sentiment worn openly, for declarations made in front of witnesses, for love that announced itself. But he had been one for precision, for intention, for the careful protection of things he believed in. She had watched him, in the last months of his illness, spend more time sitting alone than he ever had before. She had found him once, in the early morning before the house woke, with a map of the territory spread across the kitchen table, his finger tracing the eastern boundary with an expression she could not then name. She could name it now. It was the expression of a man keeping a secret. "I would like the key," she said quietly. The room went still. The laughter paused, as laughter always does when it meets something unexpected. "I beg your pardon?" Nathaniel said. "The key to the eastern parcel. The document specifies it passes to me along with the land. I would like it, please." Another beat of silence. Then Nathaniel nodded to the notary, who produced a small iron key from a sealed envelope and slid it across the table toward her. It was old, the kind of old that is almost indistinguishable from permanence, the kind of thing that looks as though it has always existed and will continue to exist long after the hands that made it are gone. She picked it up, felt its weight. She left without another word. They laughed again behind her. She heard it as she walked down the corridor, heard it thin out as the distance grew between her and them. She pushed through the heavy front door into the brightness of the day, and the laughter died entirely, swallowed by the open air and the vast indifference of the morning sky. Before we continue with the story, I want to thank everyone who supports the channel and loves our Alpha King romances. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, please consider clicking the link in the pinned comment to check out our Patreon and become a member. As a member, you'll get access to exclusive content you won't find here on YouTube, extended stories, special scenes, early access to new episodes, and complete romance arcs created just for our supporters. As a bonus, you'll also unlock exclusive vampire romance stories, diving into darker, more intense love stories filled with desire, danger, and passion. By joining, you're directly supporting the channel and helping us bring even more immersive stories to life. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from and how old you are. I hope you enjoy the story. She stood on the stone steps and breathed. In, out. The key was warm in her palm, though the morning was cool. She looked down at it. An old iron key, the kind that opens nothing modern. The kind that opens something that has been waiting. "What did you leave me?" she whispered to the air, to the memory of her father, to the shape of the secret he had kept. The wind moved through the dry grass at the edge of the drive. It sounded almost like an answer. She did not go back inside. She went east. The journey to the eastern parcel took the better part of the morning. Fernanda walked because she had no horse and no coin for one. Not yet. Not until the estate was settled and Nathaniel and the rest of them were finished picking through Eduardo's belongings with the careful enthusiasm of people who had already decided what belonged to them. She walked with the document tucked inside her dress and the iron key around her neck on a length of cord she had cut from her bag, and the road carried her away from the main settlement, away from the neat houses with their tended gardens and their overflowing wells, away from the world that had never quite found a place for her. The territory changed as she walked east. The trees grew thinner, then sparse, then absent entirely, giving way to scrubland. Low, determined bushes with small silver leaves that turned their faces away from the sun, patches of pale grass, exposed rock that the sun had bleached to the color of old bone. The road deteriorated. The marks of wheels became occasional, then rare, then disappeared entirely, and she was walking on a path maintained only by the stubborn presence of her own feet and whatever feet had come before. She passed the iron post near midday, its metal dark with age, and ringed at the base by a faint discoloration in the soil that told her water had once run here, once, in another season or another century. She crossed the dry creek bed. Nothing more now than a slight depression in the earth, a suggestion of water rather than the thing itself. She climbed a low rise and stood at the crest and looked out over the 20 acres her father had left her. It was, she could not deny it, uninspiring. The land spread in a slow decline toward a low basin, its surface broken by rock outcroppings and patches of the pale scrub, everything rendered in the colors of dust and drought. Here and there the skeletons of things that had once been, a fence post, a partial wall of stacked stone, the wooden ghost of something that might once have been a small building, stood as testimony to the fact that someone had tried here before and given up. The afternoon light lay flat across it all, unkind in its evenness, refusing shadows, making everything the same monotonous, dull gold. At the center of the basin, perhaps a quarter mile from where she stood, something rose from the ground. A well. She walked toward it. The closer she came, the more clearly she could see it. A well of the old style, built of stones that someone had fitted together with considerable care, each one selected for its flatness, its weight, its ability to hold another stone above it without shifting. The stones were weathered. She could see the marks of long seasons on them, the lichens in the cracks, the smoothing at the edges. But they were sound. The wooden crossbeam above it was cracked, but not broken. The rope, when she put her hand to it, was old, but had not rotted entirely. She looked down into the well. Darkness. She could not see water. She could not hear water. The air that rose from the shaft smelled of stone and earth and age, the smell of deep places that have not been disturbed. She reached into her dress and took out the iron key, looked at it, looked at the well. There was a small iron fitting on the side of the well's frame. She almost missed it, so weathered was the metal, so perfectly it had been incorporated into the design. And she held the key to it, and the key fit, and she turned it. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, from somewhere below, far below, deeper than the darkness she could see, she heard the sound of water moving. She stood very still. The sound grew. Not rushing, not violent, but steady, purposeful. The sound of something long held back being gently released. And then, slowly, the darkness in the well's shaft began to lighten, not with the reflection of the sky above, but with its own light, faint, silver, the color of moonlight held in still water, rising from below as though the moon itself lived down there in the deep earth. The water rose. She stared at it. Her breath had gone shallow. Her hands had gone very still at her sides. When the water reached the level where she could see it clearly, she could see that it caught the light in a way that ordinary water does not catch light. It held it, fractured it, returned it with a softness that seemed impossible given the harsh brightness of the afternoon above. It looked, she thought, the way starlight sounds. Which was not a thought she could explain, but which was the only thought she had. She reached in and touched it with one finger. The water was cool. Simply, purely cool, the way deep water is cool, the way things untouched by the surface world stay cool. She had no vessel with her. She had not brought a bucket, had not thought to, because she had not known there would be water, had been prepared only for the 20 acres of dust they had promised her. She used her hands. She drank. The water tasted of nothing and everything, of stone and sky and deep earth, of something she could not name, that lodged itself behind her sternum and stayed there, a warmth despite the cold of the water itself, spreading slowly outward like the first warmth of spring. She sat down on the edge of the well and looked out over the 20 acres. She was here because there was nowhere else. She understood this with a clarity that was not quite sadness, not quite relief, but something between them. The feeling of a door closing that you had not loved, and the question of what might lie beyond it beginning to take on a different quality, something less like dread and more like curiosity. She would build something here. She did not yet know what. She did not yet know how. But she had water, and she had ground, and she had her father's deliberate, intentional gift, and she had the knowledge that he had protected this place with his silence until the very end. She would find out why. The first days were hard in the way that all honest beginnings are hard. She went back to the main settlement long enough to collect the small bundle of things that were hers, a change of clothes, a blanket, a cooking pot, the knife that had been her mother's, a handful of coins that represented the whole of what she had saved during the years of dependence on a pack that had never wanted her. She bought bread and dried meat, and a canvas that she could use as shelter until something better was possible. She bought a bucket and a length of new rope. She bought seeds. She did not know what would grow in this soil, but she would find out. When she returned to collect these things, Nathaniel had already begun moving objects from her father's house to his own. She passed men carrying a chair she remembered from childhood, a lamp she had read by on winter evenings. She said nothing. She took what was hers and left. No one offered to help her. She did not ask. The first structure she built was not much. 4 posts, a frame, canvas stretched between them, ground cleared of the sharpest rocks for a sleeping space. But she built it with her own hands beside the well, and when it was done, she sat inside it as the sun went down, and the sky above the eastern parcel turned the color of copper and ash, and she felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt, improbably, at peace. The well was extraordinary. She did not yet know the extent of it. would not understand the full nature of what she had inherited for some time. But she could feel, in those first quiet days, that there was something different about this water. She had planted seeds along the southern edge of the parcel, in soil that by all appearances should have been unwelcoming, and watered them from the well. Within 3 days, green appeared. Not the struggling, tentative green of seeds in hostile ground, but the bright, confident green of something that had found exactly the conditions it needed. She drank the water every day, and slept better than she had in years, and woke each morning with the sense that something in her had been repaired while she slept. Some small damage quietly attended to. She had been tired for a long time. The tiredness of being unwanted leaves marks that are not visible, but are very real, a kind of erosion that happens slowly, and then all at once. Here, in the silence of the eastern parcel, she could feel that erosion stopping. Not healing yet, healing would take longer, but stopping. The well gave water generously. The rope she had brought served well enough for now. She carried buckets to her small garden. She watched the plants grow with the focused, grateful attention of someone who has not had much to be grateful for and is still learning to receive it. The nights were quiet. The stars here were extraordinary, unobscured by the lights of the settlement, spread across the sky in their careless abundance, and she would sit at the well's edge some evenings and simply look up and let the size of it undo her. She was not lonely, exactly. She had been alone in a crowd for so long that the solitude of this place felt less like deprivation and more like honesty. She was simply alone, without the additional cruelty of being surrounded by people who did not want her. She was beginning to learn the difference. On the night everything changed, the sky had been restless all day. The clouds had been building since afternoon. Not rain clouds. She had learned to read rain clouds in these weeks, and these were not those. These were the kind of clouds that gather when something is moving through the world, when pressure systems collide and the air cannot decide what it wants to be. They were dark at the base and lit from within with a pale, diffuse glow that was not lightning, but was something, some energy the sky was holding. Fernanda had been sitting at the well's edge when the sun went down, watching the colors in the west dissolve, and she had felt the unease in the air without being able to name it. The hair on her arms had risen. The small sounds of the scrubland, insects, the occasional shift of wind through the dry grass, had gone quiet. She went inside. She read by lamplight for a time, one of the books she had bought with some of the coins she had not spent on supplies, a history of the territories that she had already read twice, but found comforting in its thoroughness. The lamp threw a yellow circle of warmth. Outside, the clouds moved. She was almost asleep when she heard it. Not thunder, not wind. Something heavy and immediate. The sound of a large thing meeting the ground with force. Not the gradual sounds of a fall, but the sudden concussive sound of impact, as though something had been thrown. A crash of breaking wood, the skeleton of that old structure near the well's eastern edge, and then silence. She lay still for one moment, listening. Nothing moved. She sat up, took the lamp, and held it for a moment in both hands, considering. Whatever was out there, it had fallen. It was not moving. The predatory things she had seen in the scrubland in these weeks were small. Rabbits, a family of foxes, once the distant shape of a large bird she could not identify. And none of them would make a sound like that. This had been something large. Something that had come through the scrubland at speed, and then stopped. She pushed aside the canvas door and went out. The night was cool, the clouds thick enough now to have swallowed the stars. The lamp held its small circle of yellow around her as she walked toward the old structure, her feet on the packed earth, her breath visible in the cooler air. She found him against what remained of the stone wall. He was very large. She registered this first, before anything else. The sheer breadth of him, the length, the way his stillness carried weight even unconscious. He was on his side, one arm beneath him, and one flung out, and his clothes, which had once been fine, she could see the quality even in their current state, were torn in multiple places, sliced rather than ripped, the cuts precise and deliberately made. His long black hair was spread across the pale ground. His beard was dark against the gray of his face, the gray of blood loss. She set the lamp down and knelt beside him, not touching, only looking. She could see in the lamplight the extent of it. Wounds across his torso, a deep one at his side that was still bleeding, shallower ones across his chest and forearms, a cut at his temple that had dried dark. He was breathing. She could see the rise and fall of his chest, could hear it when she listened, labored but regular. He was alive. She looked at him for a long moment. She did not know him, could not know him. From this angle and in this state, could not read his pack markings through the blood and damage of the night. He was a stranger fallen on her land in the small hours of the morning, gravely hurt, unconscious, unable to speak for himself. She could leave him. He would likely be found by his own people in the morning, whoever they were. She could go back inside and let the morning bring what it brought. She looked at the wound at his side. She knew wounds. The pack that had never loved her had taught her that much. At least, taught her the grammar of injury and endurance by making her fluent in both. She knew a wound that would not survive until morning when she saw one. She went to the well. She lowered the bucket. The rope moved through her hands in the dark. The familiar weight of it. The familiar sound of the bucket finding water below. She pulled it up and carried it back to him, setting it beside the lamp. She worked for a long time. She tore strips from the spare canvas. She used the water from the bucket to clean the wounds, beginning with the worst of them, the one at his side, pressing the wet cloth to it with steady hands and watching the blood slow. She had expected to have to press hard and long, had expected the fight of it, had been ready to do what was necessary. She was not prepared for what happened instead. She had just pressed the second cloth against the wound at his side, the water from the well soaking through, reaching the damaged tissue, when she felt it. Under her hand, the flesh shifted. Not in the way of a wound reacting to pressure, not the normal organic response. Something else. Something she had no word for. Something that belonged to the category of events that the practical architecture of the world usually does not permit. The wound was closing. She sat back on her heels and stared. In the lamplight, with the water from the well soaking the cloth against his skin, the flesh at the edges of the wound was drawing together. Slowly. The way ice melts, not suddenly, not with drama, but with an inevitability that suggested it had always been going to happen, that the original state was the one being restored rather than a new state being created. The bleeding stopped. The torn edges of the wound found each other. She watched, perfectly still, her breath held without her having decided to hold it. She looked at the bucket. She looked back at him. She picked up a fresh strip of cloth, soaked it deliberately in the well water, and pressed it to the wound at his temple. The same thing happened. Not fast. Not a miracle in the theatrical sense of the word. Not lightning and restoration in a single instant. But steady, certain, undeniable. The flesh beneath the cloth responding to the water with a kind of memory, remembering how it was supposed to be, returning to it. She sat in the dark beside a stranger she had just watched begin to heal, and felt the world she had understood until this moment quietly reorganizing itself. Her father's 20 acres of dust, her father's iron key, her father's expression at the kitchen table, tracing the eastern boundary on a map in the early morning before the house woke. Not dust. A miracle. She went back to the well and stood at its edge and looked down at the silver light that lived in the water. In the moonless dark, it was more visible than it had been in the day. That faint luminescence rising from deep below, casting no shadow, warming nothing, simply present. She reached in and trailed her fingers through it. She understood, in the particular way that understanding comes not from reasoning, but from something deeper and older than reason, that her father had known. He had known, and he had protected it, and he had given it to her. Not because she was least deserving, because she was the only one he had trusted with it. She carried more buckets of water back to the stranger and cleaned every wound she could find, watching each one close in the lamp's yellow circle. The deep one at his side was the last, and the slowest, and she pressed her cloth against it for a long time, adding water when the cloth dried, watching the healing with a steadiness she surprised herself with. Her hands did not shake. Her heart beat hard but evenly. When she was finished, he was breathing more easily. The gray had left his face. He was still deeply unconscious. Sleep now, rather than the terrible blankness of the near dead. But he was warm, and his color had returned, and when she rested 2 fingers at his throat, his pulse was strong and steady. She pulled her blanket from inside and laid it over him. She sat beside him until the first gray light of dawn began to separate the sky from the scrubland, and then she put out the lamp and let the day come. He woke in the late morning, in the full light. Fernanda was at her small cook fire when she heard him, the sound of a large person becoming aware of their own body and the unfamiliarity of their surroundings, a controlled stillness that was, she would later learn, characteristic of him, the instinct of a man who had trained himself never to betray surprise. She set down the pot she was tending and walked toward him. He was sitting up against the stone wall, the blanket fallen to his waist, and he was looking at her with eyes that were very dark and very alert. The morning light fell across him, and she saw him fully for the first time. The breadth of his shoulders, the evidence in his build of something cultivated and maintained, the long black hair still carrying leaves and dust from the night, the short beard against the strong line of his jaw. His eyes moved from her face to the landscape behind her and back, taking in everything with the systematic precision of someone who has learned that information is survival. He looked at his own chest, at the wounds, or rather, at the places where wounds had been. The skin was unmarked. No scars, no healing seams, not even the faint discoloration of recent injury. He touched the place at his side with one hand, pressing, confirming what his eyes showed him, and his expression, controlled, guarded, shifted for just a moment into something she could not quite read. He looked at her again. She held his gaze and waited. "You healed me," he said. His voice was deep. It had roughness in it, the roughness of a voice that has been trained to command, the natural authority of someone who has not spent much time framing things as suggestions. But it was not unkind. "The water healed you," she said. "I only carried it." He looked at the well. Then he looked at her again, and she saw him making decisions, reevaluating, recalibrating against whatever picture of the world he had carried into the darkness of the night before. She stood in her red dress with her white hair in the bright morning and watched him think, and felt the strange calm that had become her companion in these weeks, that quality of simply being present for what was happening without trying to shape it before it was ready to be shaped. "Where am I?" he asked. "Eastern parcel of Lobaton territory," she said. "The borderland. No one comes here much." A pause. She could see him absorbing this. "Your name?" he said. "Fernanda Lobaton." She paused. "And you are?" The question hung between them in the still morning air. She watched something move in his face. Not hesitation, exactly, but the brief consideration of a man deciding how much truth is appropriate and settling, not without some surprise at his own choice, on all of it. "Tetram Heveos," he said. She stood very still. She knew the name. There was no one in the surrounding territories who did not know the name. Tetram Heveos, the Alpha King of the Heveos Pack, whose territory pressed against the eastern and northern borders of the Lobaton lands, whose pack had grown in strength and wealth through a combination of good strategy and the absolute loyalty of its members. Tetrom Heveos, whose reputation was built on exactly two things: the fierceness with which he protected his own, and the decisiveness with which he met his enemies. She was looking at him, and he was looking back at her, and the morning was very quiet. "Your pack is at war with mine," she said. Not an accusation, simply a fact. "Our packs are in competition," he said. "They are not precisely at war. Not yet. A beat. Your people have been expanding toward the northern water sources. Your people have been blocking the southern trade roads." "Yes," he said, with no particular apology in it, but also no particular defensiveness. "Yes, they have." She looked at him for a moment longer, then turned back to her fire. "There is food if you want it," she said over her shoulder. "You should eat. You lost a great deal of blood." She heard him move, carefully, testing his body's responses, finding them trustworthy. And then she heard the soft sounds of him coming to sit near the fire, maintaining a distance that was respectful without being formal. She handed him a bowl of the simple things she had made, grain cooked with dried herbs, the best she could do with what she had, and watched from the corner of her eye as he took it and ate without ceremony. A king, eating plain food from a battered pot in the scrubland, beside a woman who had no reason to trust him and every reason to turn him over to his enemies. He ate the whole bowl. He looked at the fire. "Tell me what happened to you," she said. Not a command. An offer. He was quiet for a moment, and she had the feeling that this was not a thing he would say to most people, that the circumstances of the night and the morning, and whatever he had felt when he had seen his own wounds healed, had created an opening that was not usually there. "Ambush," he said. "3 of my most trusted advisors. I had been meeting with them privately at the border station to discuss the trade negotiations. They brought men, paid men, not pack members, no loyalty to anyone but the gold they were given." He paused. "They left me for dead." She listened. "They will return to the pack and report that I was killed by Lobaton scouts," he continued. "They will use my death to start the war they have been pushing for. There are men in my pack, and men in yours who want this war, because men who want wars are always thinking about what comes after, about the redistribution of territory and water rights, and the movement of power. And you do not want the war," she said. "I did not want it before last night," he said, with a dry precision that might, in another context, have been humor. "My feelings on the subject have not improved." She looked at him. He looked at the fire. The morning sat around them, warm and very quiet. "How long will you need to recover?" she said. He turned his head and looked at her, and she had the feeling, sharp, certain, the kind of feeling that arrives before reasoning catches up with it, that he was not accustomed to being asked this question, not from lack of care, but from excess of image. Kings are not typically allowed to need recovery time. "A day," he said. "Perhaps 2. "You can stay," she said. "There is shelter enough." She gestured at the canvas structure beside the well. "I have no extra bedding, but the nights have been mild." He looked at the canvas structure, the small cook fire, the bucket and rope, the small garden along the southern edge with its improbable green. He looked at all of this with the attention of a man cataloging, and his face was very still. "You live here alone," he said. "Yes." "By choice?" She considered the question with the honesty it deserved. "By a combination of circumstances and choice," she said. "The circumstances came first. The choice followed from them." He accepted this. She watched him accept it, not with pity, which she would have refused, but with the neutral recognition of someone who understands that the world distributes its difficulties unevenly, and that this is not a matter of cosmic justice, but simply of the way things are. "I will not bring my trouble here," he said. "If you want me to go, I will go." "Your trouble is already here," she said practically. You arrived with it last night. What matters now is what comes next. A long pause. The fire popped. Yes, he said quietly. What comes next? He stayed 2 days. He was not an easy man to have in a small space. Not because he was difficult in the ordinary sense of the word, not because he was demanding or thoughtless or careless of her. He was none of those things. But he was large in a way that was not only physical, and he was present in a way that made the air around him feel different. And Fernanda, who had been alone for some weeks in the quiet of the eastern parcel and had settled into a particular quality of silence, found that his presence reorganized everything without trying to. He helped without being asked. This was the thing she noticed first. He woke before she did on the second morning, and when she emerged from the canvas structure, she found that the fire had been rebuilt, and the bucket had been filled from the well and set beside the fire. He was sitting at the well's edge with his knees drawn up and his hands hanging loose between them, looking east. And he turned when he heard her, and she saw no expression of expectation on his face, no performance of virtue. He had simply done the useful things because they were useful. She stood with the morning light on her and looked at him. He looked back. You did not sleep inside, she said. I sleep outside when I can, he said. Old habit, the open air. She nodded. She understood this. The preference for sky over ceiling, for the unimpeded sight of what might be coming, for the freedom of the unlocked room. They ate breakfast in a silence that was not uncomfortable. He was learning, she thought, that she did not fill silence for its own sake, that the quiet between them was not absence of something but a kind of texture in itself, something with weight and quality. He seemed by that second morning to have accepted this, to have put away whatever professional habit of constant conversation or command he had arrived with, and replaced it with a willingness to simply be present. She found this surprising. She would not have expected it from what she knew of him, which was the public knowledge, the reputation, the carefully maintained image of a man who was all force and strategy. But the man sitting at her fire was not that image. He was quieter, more watchful, more uncertain, in a way that was not weakness but something else, something that looked, she thought, like honesty. In the afternoon of the second day, she found him looking at her garden. He was crouching at the edge of it, examining the plants with the same focused attention he brought to everything, and he reached out and touched one leaf, very gently, with one finger. The tenderness of the gesture startled her. This large, fierce, dark man, touching a plant in her garden, with the careful attention of someone holding something he does not want to damage. What did you plant? He asked without turning. She told him. He listened, still crouching, still looking at the plants. My mother had a garden, he said, in the inner courtyard of the old house, before. He stopped. She did not ask about the before. She had learned in the years of managing her own befores that there are things that should be offered rather than extracted. He stood, turned to look at her. The afternoon light was behind him, making him a dark shape against the bright sky. And then he moved, and the light fell differently, and she could see his face clearly. The marks of the last 2 days in it, not just the physical evidence of injury and recovery, but something underneath, something that had been there before, and that the events of the past days had stripped some covering from. A tiredness, a loneliness. The particular loneliness of command, which is not the loneliness of being without people, but the loneliness of always being slightly apart from them. She recognized it. You should tell me more about what happened, she said, so that I understand what you'll be walking back into. He told her. It came out in pieces, not because he was being strategic, but because that was the nature of it, because there were pieces he was still working out for himself. His 3 advisors, men he had known for years, men whose judgment he had relied on, men he had trusted with the complex work of the negotiations, had been in contact with factions within both the Heveos and Lobaton packs who wanted war. Not for ideology, not for any principle, but for the classic and ancient reason: the redistribution of territory that follows violence, the opportunities that open in the wake of instability. The plan had been clean, from their perspective. Remove Tetrom. Blame the Lobaton scouts. Let the war they had been obstructing become inevitable. With Tetrom gone, the more warlike members of the Heveos Council would take over. The same calculation applied on the Lobaton side, where his counterparts in the peace process would lose their protection. They didn't know where you were, Fernanda said. No. I had kept the location of the meeting private. By design, I did not want the delegations to follow and complicate things. A pause. That caution saved my life, as it turned out. They knew the general border area, not the specific location. They could not mount a full search without revealing that I was missing, which would collapse the cover story before they were ready. So there is a window, she said. A narrow one. I need to return before they can establish the narrative of my death. Once the story is fixed, once they have told it to enough people and those people have repeated it, it becomes harder to dislodge. He paused. I need to walk back into the pack house alive in front of witnesses, with enough of the truth to make the betrayal visible before they can reframe it. Can you do that? He looked at her for a moment. I have done harder things, he said. She believed him. In the last hour before he left, as the sun was beginning its decline and the shadows in the scrubland lengthened, he stood at the well and looked into it. May I? He asked, gesturing at the bucket. She handed it to him. He lowered it and drew it up himself, and he looked at the water for a moment before drinking from it directly, not with a cup, with his hands, cupping them and bringing the water to his lips. She watched him close his eyes. When he opened them, he looked at her. He knew what he was protecting, he said. She felt the words land somewhere deep. Yes, she said. I think he did. Why did they not know? Your pack. Why did they not find this on his maps, in his papers? Because he never wrote it down, she said. I think he kept it only in himself. She paused. And in me. The things he told me, quietly, when no one was listening, I understand them differently now. I thought he was teaching me patience. I think he was teaching me to wait for what was mine. Tetram looked at her for a long moment. The light was golden, and the well was silver, and she stood in her red dress with her white hair, and he looked at her with an expression she could not read. And then he picked up his coat. She had mended the worst of the tears in it, had not made it new but had made it serviceable, and put it on. I will come back, he said. Not a promise designed to reassure. A statement of fact, delivered in the same direct tone as everything else he had said to her. A simple declaration of intent. She nodded. Be careful, she said. He looked at her with that faint quality again, the one that looked like surprise at finding something unexpected, and then he walked into the scrubland and was gone. She stood at the well for a long time after he left. The silence of the eastern parcel settled back around her, familiar and comfortable. But it felt different now. Not emptier, exactly, but more spacious, as though something had expanded it. She turned the iron key in her hands, which she had been holding without noticing, and felt the small weight of it. She went back to her garden. She had work to do. He returned 10 days later. She heard him coming before she saw him. The sound of a horse this time, moving at a controlled pace through the scrubland, and she stood at the well and watched the shape of him appear out of the pale dust. He was riding a dark horse, and he was in clean clothes, and he carried his authority differently now, more visibly, the way authority returns to its natural place when threats to it have been addressed. But his face, when he swung down from the horse and walked toward her, was the same face she had seen at the cook fire, the face underneath, He had brought things. She had not expected this, and she stood with her arms at her sides as he unloaded the saddlebag. A proper cooking pot, large and well made. Blankets, good ones, thick and warm. Preserved food of a quality she had not had since before her father's illness began its long accounting. A small crate of tools, precisely chosen. A mallet, a saw, a coil of good rope. The materials for a more permanent roof. He set them down and stood and looked at her. She said, "You didn't need to." "I know," he said. The word hung between them, simple and complete. She looked at the things he had brought. She looked at him. She felt something that was not quite embarrassment and not quite gratitude, something that had more warmth in it than either, something she was not yet ready to name. "How did it go?" she asked. "They are alive," he said, and she understood from his tone that this was a considered mercy rather than a failure of strength. In custody, the delegations on both sides received a full account. A beat. "The war is avoided, for now. For now is good," she said. "For now is always the best any of us can do," he agreed. He stayed that day, and together they began to build a more permanent structure beside the well. He worked with his hands as though he had always worked with his hands, which she suspected was true, suspected that beneath the political animal, there was always a man who preferred physical problems to abstract ones. They talked as they worked, or rather they moved between talk and silence in a way that felt natural, that had no self-consciousness in it. She told him about the pack, about growing up Omega in a hierarchy that considered the designation a judgment rather than a description, about the small cruelties, which were actually not small, which were the kind of cruelty that works through accumulation rather than singular violence, the kind that hollows rather than breaks, about her father, the quiet man who had loved her in the ways that quiet men love, indirectly, by protecting things, by leaving keys. He listened with the same quality of attention he brought to everything. No performance of sympathy, no reflexive reassurances that were really about his own discomfort. He simply listened, and she felt, in being listened to this way, something she had felt very rarely, the sensation of being taken seriously. In exchange, he told her things. He told her about the first winter of his leadership, when 3 packs to the north had tested the new king's resolve, and he had spent 4 months in a state of controlled crisis that he could show to no one, because the image of control was the thing holding everything together, and the cost of that had been a loneliness so complete that he could not now look back at those months without feeling the echo of it. He told her about the advisors who had betrayed him, not with anger, but with a quality of careful excavation, as though he were trying to understand rather than condemn. He told her about the peace negotiations and why he had wanted them, which was not for any abstract reason, but for the concrete one. He had seen what the last war had cost in lives and livestock and water access, and he found the accounting simply unacceptable. He was, she thought, a man who had been trained to project a version of himself that was less complicated than the reality, and who had, whether through exhaustion or something else she could not yet identify, put that projection aside in her company. She was not sure what to do with that. She was not sure she had any practice receiving this. She had never been the person someone came to for honesty, because the people around her had never considered her worth being honest with. She filed this away. She would think about it later. He left before dark, promising to return, and she stood at the well and watched him ride away through the amber evening, and then turned to look at the structure they had raised together. The new walls that were straight and solid, in a way her first canvas effort had not been. She put her hand against the wood of the frame and felt it warm from the day's sun. The weeks that followed had a rhythm. He came when he could, never on a fixed schedule, which she came to understand was both the nature of his position and the nature of the situation. the need for discretion during a period when the fragile quiet between the packs could still be threatened by the wrong information reaching the wrong people. But he came often. More often than the responsibilities of a king probably permitted, and she did not ask about this discrepancy because she did not want to examine it too closely yet. He always brought something. Not always material. Sometimes it was simply himself, arriving at dusk to sit at the well's edge with her and watch the stars come out, talking or not talking with equal ease. But sometimes it was practical. More tools, more building materials, a small cistern to collect rainwater when it came, a better lamp. He worked alongside her with the same lack of ceremony, sleeves rolled up, doing what needed doing. The house grew. Not a palace. She had not asked for a palace, and he had not offered one, had seemed to understand instinctively that what she was building here was not a compensation for what she had been denied, but something that was entirely its own, shaped by her own hands and her own judgment. He contributed to what she was building rather than replacing it with something else. She started to know him. She started to know the quality of his silences. There was the thinking silence, and the tired silence, and the watchful silence, and the rare and startling silence that was simply contentment, which she encountered sometimes in the early evenings when they had been working hard and were sitting at the fire, and he would go quiet with a quality of ease that she suspected very few people had ever seen in him. She started to know the way his face changed when he found something genuinely amusing, which was not the politic smile, but a smaller, more private thing, a slight deepening at the corner of his mouth, and a quality in his eyes that was actual warmth. She started to know that he was particularly sharp in the early morning, and particular slow at midday, that he was careful with small things, and occasionally impatient with large obstacles that should, by his assessment, simply move, that he had opinions about architecture, and the management of water, and the moral philosophy of governance, and no opinions at all about most of the social customs that other people of his position spent considerable energy on. He started to know her, in turn. She could see it happening. The careful, systematic knowing of someone who takes the work seriously, who understands that a person is not a summary, but an accumulation of specific things. He noticed that she read constantly and asked about what she was reading, rather than whether she was reading, which was its own form of respect. He noticed that she was most at ease in the early hours, and that the well drew her at odd moments throughout the day, as though she needed to confirm its presence. He noticed that she did not talk much about her father, but that the subject, when it came up, carried for her a particular quality of reverence, and he was careful with it. They were, she thought one evening, learning each other. She was not sure what to do with what she was learning. The trouble began, as she had known it would, from two directions. The first came from her pack. A delegation arrived on a Tuesday, walking up the old road toward her well with the particular self-righteousness of people who have decided they are doing something difficult out of duty. There were 3 of them. Cousin Mirabelle, who had laughed the loudest at the reading of the will. A young elder named Castor, who was Nathaniel's creature and had never shown any interest in Fernanda, until she had something someone wanted. And a woman named Dove Prentice, who was the pack's unofficial interpreter of social consequence, and was often deployed when the message being delivered needed a veneer of compassion. Fernanda watched them come, and felt the familiar, ancient tightening in her chest. Not fear, exactly, but the body's memory of fear, the accumulated record of every interaction that had ended in diminishment. She stood by the well and waited. They stopped at a distance that was just slightly too far for easy conversation, which was a power move she had learned to read, the creation of distance as a demonstration of the one imposing it. Mirabelle spoke first. Fernanda. Not her name as greeting, her name as warning. Mirabelle, she said. We have heard, Castor said, stepping slightly forward, that you have been entertaining the Hivios king on your property. She said nothing. You understand how this looks, Dove said, and her voice had that carefully modulated quality of someone who has practiced sounding reasonable. For a member of our pack to be in private association with the leader of a rival territory, at a moment when relations between our packs are still uncertain. "What is it you want?" Fernanda asked. A short pause. She had, she knew, violated the expected grammar of this conversation, which should have involved her defending herself, explaining, seeking their approval. She had refused the role. "We want you to end it," Mirabelle said, the veneer gone, the core of it exposed. "Whatever this is with the Heveos King, it needs to stop. You are not helping yourself, and you are embarrassing the pack." "The pack," Fernanda said slowly. "That left me to fend for myself on 20 acres of land they were certain was worthless." "You were given what your father left you," Castor said. "No one owes you?" "I agree," she said. "No one owes me anything, and I owe you the same." She looked at all three of them. "Tell Nathaniel I send my regards. You are welcome to drink from the well before you go. You're a long walk from the settlement." She turned and went inside. She heard Dove say something behind her, the beginning of another well-modulated sentence, and then silence, and then the sound of 3 pairs of feet on the hard earth, retreating toward the old road. She sat inside for a time afterward, not crying. She had gone beyond that, or more precisely, she had arrived somewhere that no longer had crying as a response to this kind of thing. She was aware of her own heartbeat, steady and quiet. She was aware of the sound of the well, which had its own faint sound, barely audible but present if you knew to listen for it. They had wanted her obedient. They had wanted her to be the thing they had always required her to be. Small, manageable, grateful for whatever scraps they chose to leave her. She was no longer that. She was not sure when, exactly, she had stopped being that. Maybe at the reading of the will, when she had picked up the iron key and walked out. Maybe before. Maybe in some quiet moment here at the well that had not announced itself as significant but had been. She went back outside and tended her garden. The second complication arrived by letter. Tetram brought it himself, and the quality of stillness around him when he arrived told her something was wrong before he showed her the paper. He dismounted and came to sit beside her at the well, and he held the letter in his hands for a moment before he gave it to her. It was from his council, specifically from the 3 senior members who had not been involved in the betrayal, who were the core of his legitimate inner circle. It was carefully worded, as such things always are, the disagreement expressed in the language of concern and procedure, rather than the language of actual objection. But the meaning was clear. His relationship with a Lobaton Omega was politically inconvenient. The ongoing negotiations required him to be seen as neutral, as operating above the interests of any individual or subgroup. His frequent visits to the eastern parcel were being noted. There were questions about his judgment. She read it twice. Then she folded it and set it on her knee. "What do you want to do?" she asked. He was looking at the well. "I want to be honest," he said. "With you and with them. I have found that I am very tired of the version of things that is required for politics." "The honest version," she said, "is not convenient for either of us." "No," he said. "It isn't." She looked at the folded letter. "They will use it," she said. "The people who want the war. They will use the idea of you and me to say you've been compromised. They'll say you can't negotiate fairly because you have a personal investment in the outcome." "Yes," he said. "They will say that. And the people in my pack who want war will say I've been manipulated, that I'm being used by the Heveos King to gain access to the well." "Yes." A long silence. The afternoon moved around them. A small bird landed briefly on the edge of the well and regarded them with the unimpressed attention of small birds, and then departed. "I'm not going to stop seeing you," he said, not aggressively. Simply the same way he said everything. She looked at him. "I am aware," he continued, with the quality of someone choosing each word with deliberate care. that this is not a simple situation. I am aware that I have no right to ask anything of you, that you have managed very well without my involvement, that you have built something here that is entirely yours. I am not asking for anything. A pause. But I am telling you clearly that I have no intention of being reasonable about this. She felt the words land in layers, each one settling before the next arrived. That is a remarkable thing to say, she said finally. I know, he said. I have had a great deal of time on very long rides to think about how to say it. She was quiet for a moment. You are a king, she said. Yes. And I am. I know what you are going to say, he said, and turned to look at her. And there was something in his face that was less controlled than usual, something that had broken through the surface of the careful management. I know, and it does not matter to me. The hierarchy that named you that was wrong about you. It has been wrong about you in every way for your entire life. He paused. I know something about being placed in categories that do not fit, about having an identity assigned that does not account for all that you actually are. She held his gaze. The afternoon light was in his hair and on the planes of his face and in the darkness of his eyes that were looking at her with an honesty so complete that it was almost uncomfortable. You should know, she said carefully, that I am not without my own complications. I am aware, he said, and the corner of his mouth moved, that small private thing she had learned to look for. You are very complicated. It is, to be truthful, one of the things I find most admirable about you. She looked away from him toward the scrubland, the pale, dry grasses, the stone outcroppings, the long, low horizon. She breathed. She thought about her father at the kitchen table with the map. She thought about the iron key. She thought about the night she had walked out of the reading room with laughter behind her and the morning sky ahead of her, and the question of what was east. She was not going to be reasonable about this either. I will not leave, she said. The eastern parcel is mine, and I will not be pushed out of it by either pack or any council. I would not ask that of you, he said immediately. And I will not perform indifference to make anyone comfortable. If you come here and drink tea by my fire, then I will be glad of it, and if anyone asks me directly, I will say so. I will ask the same of myself, he said. She nodded, folded the letter again, set it down on the ground beside the well, where the wind eventually caught it and carried it away. There is tea, she said, if you want it. I do, he said. They sat through the afternoon and into the evening, talking and not talking, and the stars came out one by one, and the well glowed its faint silver, and the eastern parcel was quiet around them, and she thought that if there was a version of peace to be had, it might look something like this. The Seca came without warning. Or rather, it came with the kind of warning that is only visible in retrospect. The slight decrease in the volume of the streams, the shift in the color of the sky at certain hours, the behavior of the animals in the scrubland. These were signs she had learned to read in her weeks here, and she had noted them, had even said something to Tetrom about it on one of his visits, but neither of them had expected the speed of it. Within 3 weeks of the first signs, the situation had gone from concerning to critical. The streams that fed the main Lobaton settlement dropped to trickles. The wells in the settlement began to yield less, then much less, then in some cases nothing at all. The river that marked the northern boundary of the territory, which should have been running full with spring snowmelt from the mountains, was a narrow thread of itself, flowing sluggishly over stones that were usually underwater. Fernanda heard all of this from Tetrom, who heard it from his scouts, who were watching the Lobaton territory with the careful attention of neighbors who have recently avoided a war and are invested in the stability of the resulting peace. He came to tell her, and she listened to him describe the situation with the particular quality of attention that had become her habit, the attention that was about more than the words themselves. How long can they last? She asked. Without another source. Perhaps 2 weeks before it becomes a survival issue. The livestock will start dying before that. A pause. There is water in my territory that I could offer, but the logistics are difficult, and the political questions. They will come here, she said. He looked at her. They will have no choice, she said. And when they come, I will not turn them away. He was quiet for a moment. You understand that they will not come with apologies. They will come with urgency and need, and they will be frightened, and frightened people are often not their best selves. Yes, she said. I know frightened people. She paused. I grew up surrounded by them. He looked at her for a long moment, with that expression she had learned to recognize, the one that was not quite admiration and not quite love, but occupied the territory between them, the territory that was slowly, over these months, becoming more clearly defined. What will your condition be? He asked. She thought about it. No force, no attempted seizure of the land, no violence against anyone on this property. She paused. That is all. That is a very small price for what you are offering, he said. It is not a price, she said. It is simply the world I want to live in. They came in the third week. They came in the way of people who have exhausted their other options, who have spent the time leading up to this moment reassuring each other that they would find another solution, that they would not need to do this thing. They came on foot and on horseback, small groups at first, and then larger ones, following the dry creek bed east toward the borderland, toward the 20 acres that they had once dismissed as dust and wind and nothing. Nathaniel came among the second group, and she watched him ride up the old road with the particular quality of attention she reserved for things that required her to remain very calm. He looked older than she remembered. The drought had accelerated something in him, or perhaps it was something else. The collapse of a certainty he had depended on, the rearrangement of the world into a configuration that required him to revise his understanding of things. He stopped his horse at the edge of the property. He looked at the well. He looked at her. The garden behind her was full of life, thick and green and almost aggressively healthy, a testament to what the water from the well could do in willing soil. The house she had built was small but solid and clean. The well itself was surrounded by the worn stone and the rope and the bucket and the evidence of daily use, and above it the crossbeam was strong, and the morning light lay on the water below with that faint silver quality that she had stopped being surprised by, but which still moved her every morning when she looked at it. She waited. Fernanda, he said. His voice was different. Not the expansive authority of the reading room, something smaller, not humbled exactly, but reduced to its actual size. Nathaniel, she said. A pause. Around him, the people who had come with him were watching, and the people from the earlier groups who were already drawing water and filling their containers were watching, and no one was laughing. The wells are dry, he said. I know, she said. We need... He stopped. The sentence that followed was one he had been practicing. She could see that, could see the evidence of preparation in his face, and it had not survived the moment of actually saying it. He tried again. We would ask. She let him have the silence. We need water, he said finally, simply, without the construction of the managed sentence. We need water and there is nowhere else. She looked at him. She looked at Mirabelle, who was behind him, who had not laughed at her today, whose face held something that was not quite shame, but was the beginning of it. She looked at the others, the cousins, the elders, the ordinary members of the pack who had never personally done her harm, but who had also never intervened against those who had simply looked away, which is its own kind of complicity. She felt the weight of what she could do here. She understood it with complete clarity. She could refuse. She could impose terms that were punishing. She could use the water the way power has always used scarcity, as a lever. She could make them understand, in the most direct possible language, what they had given up when they had dismissed her. She chose differently. "The well is deep," she said. "Draw as much as you need. Leave the rope and bucket for the next group. Come back as many times as necessary until the rains return." Silence. Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment. She met his gaze without expression, without triumph, without the performance of generosity, simply steady. "One condition," she said. "No one attempts to take this land by force. No one attempts to intimidate or threaten me or anyone who lives or works here. You draw water peacefully, or you don't draw it at all." Nathaniel nodded. "Agreed," he said, and she heard in it the weight of what was being agreed to, which was more than the stated terms. He dismounted and walked to the well and drew water and drank it. His hands shook slightly. She watched him drink and felt nothing that she had expected to feel. No triumph, no grief, no catharsis of the dramatic sort. She felt something quieter, something that was closer to resolution than revenge. The closing of a door that had been open and cold for a very long time. Tetram arrived in the late afternoon. He had known from the scouts that the delegations had gone east, and he had come at a controlled pace, not rushing, not dramatic, but present. He rode up the old road, and the people at the well looked at him with the particular quality of attention given to a king who arrives unexpectedly, and he did not acknowledge this, only dismounted and walked to where she stood. He looked at the well, at the people around it, at the containers being filled, at the slow, patient movement of people carrying water back to their horses, back to their families. He looked at her. "All of them?" he said quietly. "All of them," she confirmed. He was quiet for a long moment. She could feel, in his stillness, the same thing she felt. The weight of the specific choice, the understanding of what it meant and what it cost and what it said about the one who made it. "You could have made them understand," he said. "They will understand," she said. "It will just take longer this way, and in the meantime, everyone drinks." He looked at her for so long that she became very aware of the light on the scrubland, and the sound of the well and the quality of the air between them, which was its own kind of atmosphere, its own weather. "I need to say something to you," he said. She waited. "I have been thinking about how to say this since the third time I rode out here," he began, and there was something in his voice that was different from his usual precision, something less controlled, something that carried the evidence of the difficulty of the saying. "And I have concluded that there is no way to say it that fully accounts for the extent of it, so I will simply say it and trust that you are sufficient to receiving it." She was very still. "What I feel for you," he said, "is not gratitude. It was gratitude, at the beginning, clear, specific gratitude for a life continued when it should have ended. But that is not what this is now." He paused. "What this is now is something I did not know I was missing until I found it, which is someone who makes me want to be the thing I actually am, rather than the thing I am required to perform." Another pause, shorter. "I love you. That is the simple version. The complicated version would take considerably longer, and I think we both have other things to do today." She looked at him. The people around the well were very deliberately focused on their own activities. She thought about the reading of the will and the laughter that had followed her out the door. She thought about the iron key and the long walk east and the night she had found him in the ruins. She thought about her father at the kitchen table, tracing the boundary with one careful finger, keeping a secret that was not a secret from her. She thought about what it had meant to be unwanted for so long, and what it meant now to be standing in her own place, on her own ground, beside her own well, being told that she was loved. "I love you too," she said, quietly, specifically, the truth of it so obvious that the words for it felt almost insufficient, almost too small for the thing they were carrying. He looked at her for a moment, and the expression on his face was the one she had only seen fragments of before, the one that lived underneath the king. Open, direct, with nothing managed about it. He reached out and took her hand, and his hand was large and warm around hers, and she felt the realness of it, the specific and unrepeatable realness of this particular man's particular hand around hers on this particular afternoon. Around them, people drew water from her well. "I want to ask you something," he said. "And I want to be clear that the asking is a choice, not a necessity. That you have everything you need here with or without my involvement, that I am not offering rescue because you do not need rescuing." "Ask," she said. "Come to the main house," he said. "Not as a guest, not as someone under protection, as someone who belongs there." He paused. "As my queen, if you want it." She looked at the well, at the garden, at the small house she had built with her own hands and his, the structure that had started as 4 posts and canvas and was now something she was genuinely proud of. "I am not going anywhere permanently," she said. "This land is mine. This well is mine." "Of course," he said immediately. "I would need to come back often. The well needs tending. The garden needs tending. I will come with you," he said, "when I can." She looked at him. He looked at her. The afternoon was very long and golden around them. "Then yes," she said, "I think I want that." He brought her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to the back of it, with the particular quality of someone performing a gesture that is usually ceremonial and meaning it completely. She felt the warmth of his lips against her skin and stood very still, receiving it. Near the well, Nathaniel Lobaton was watching. She saw him look away. She saw something in his face that she recognized as the beginning of an accounting, the slow, uncomfortable process of revising a story you have told yourself for so long that its falseness is genuinely startling when it finally becomes visible. She did not gloat. She only turned back to Tetram, and he was looking at her, and she thought that the world was very large and very strange, and that her father, wherever he was, might be satisfied with the way things had turned out. 3 days later, standing before the gathered members of both packs, not a ceremony, simply a moment, the 2 packs in the same place at the same time for the first time in a generation, drawn together by the well and by necessity, and by the evidence of what Fernanda Lobaton and Tetram Heveos had built in the space between their territories. Tetram spoke. He spoke to his council first, and the speech he gave was not what any of them had expected, which was neither apology nor justification, but simply clarity. He said what the eastern parcel was. He said what the water could do. He said what it had done for him, personally, in the literal and in the other sense. He said that the land was Fernanda Lobaton's absolutely and irrevocably, that no claim upon it would be entertained from any quarter, that it was under royal protection not because she required his protection, but because the kingdom required it, because the kingdom had nearly gone to war over water, and the one person who understood water was standing in a red dress beside a well in the borderland, and deserved to be treated accordingly. Then he turned to her, in front of everyone, and he said what he had already said to her privately. But he said it here, in public, in the hearing of every person who had ever looked past her, or through her, or at the space beside her, rather than at her. He said it with the same directness with which he said everything, without performance, without political decoration. He said he loved her. He asked her to be his queen. The silence that followed was the particular quality of silence that a crowd makes when it is processing something that requires adjustment. It was not hostile. It was not celebratory. Not yet. It was the silence of recalibration. And then, from somewhere in the back of the gathered crowd, she did not see who, someone started to clap. Slowly at first, then with the growing rhythm of agreement, of something true being acknowledged. Fernanda stood at the well's edge and looked out at all of them, the faces she had grown up among, the faces she did not know, the faces of Nathaniel and Mirabel, who were clapping with the rest, slowly, with the quality of people correcting an old mistake. and she felt something that went beyond the usual inventory of her feelings, something that was not quite joy and not quite grief, but partook of both, the way the best things do. She looked at Tetram beside her. He was looking at her with everything visible on his face. The king and the man, both present, neither one subordinating the other. The fierceness and the tenderness together, the force and the care, the absolute certainty of what he was. She took his hand. He held it. The rain came on the 5th day. Not in the dramatic way of weather that has been anticipated. Not with a buildup of great clouds and theatrical thunder. It came quietly, in the early morning, beginning as a sound on the roof of the small house at the well, a soft percussion that woke her before she understood what she was hearing. She lay still for a moment, listening. Then she understood, and sat up and went to the door. The rain was steady and pale in the pre-dawn light, falling without urgency, the rain of a season correcting itself after a temporary confusion. She stood in the doorway and felt it on her face and her bare feet and her white hair and her skin. Behind her, Tetram had woken and was sitting up, watching her. In the gray light, his face was soft with recent sleep and something else. The same expression he wore when he thought she wasn't looking. The one she had learned to recognize as his version of simple happiness, which he did not yet have a great deal of practice showing. "Rain," she said. "I hear it," he said. She stepped out into it. Fully, without hesitation, letting it fall on her. She walked to the well and stood at its edge and looked down. The silver light was there as always, constant and unhurried, the well that had not dried even when everything else had. The rain came down around her, and she heard, faint, distant, carried by the changed air, the sound of the dry creek bed beginning to fill. Tetram came to stand beside her. He was in no hurry. He stood in the rain as she did, without objection to the water or to the cold of it, present in the moment the way he was learning to be present in moments, the way she was still learning to teach herself that presence was safe. They stood side by side and listened to the rain. "Your father was remarkable," he said. "Yes," she said. "He was. He knew exactly what he was leaving you." She thought about it. "He left me the thing that would bring me what I needed," she said. "I don't know if he could have predicted specifically." She paused. "But I think he knew the kind of thing, the kind of life. He was always very precise about what he wanted for me, even when he couldn't say it directly." Tetram was quiet for a moment. Then, "I should like to find the place he's buried," he said, "and stand there for a while, if you would take me." She looked at him. The rain on his face, on his dark hair, on his shoulders. The expression that was only for her, the one that lived underneath everything else. "Yes," she said, "I would take you." The rain fell and the creek bed filled, and somewhere in the settlement, the wells were beginning to receive their water again, slowly, the stone throat of each one taking in what the sky was offering, the dark water rising in the dark earth the way it always has and always will. The fundamental exchange of the world continuing without interruption. The well on the eastern parcel kept its silver light. It always would. She had never inherited dust. She had inherited a miracle. And the miracle had known her before she had known herself, had known what she needed, what she was capable of receiving, what she had in her that the world had not yet found a use for. It had waited in the deep earth of 20 acres, patient as stone, for the right hands to hold the iron key, for the right person to come east when everyone else was going west. She stood in the rain beside the man she loved, and felt the specific and precise and unrepeatable weight of everything that had led to this moment, all the small humiliations, and the large silences and the nights she had spent alone, learning the difference between loneliness and solitude, and the night she had found a man bleeding in the ruins and carried buckets of silver water in the dark. She had been afraid once that there was no place for her in the world, that the world had already distributed itself without leaving a portion for Fernanda Lobaton. She was not afraid of that anymore. She was in her place. She had built it, one stone at a time, beside a well her father had left her in the borderland that no one had wanted, and she had grown things there, and healed things there, and loved things there, and the rain was falling and the water was rising, and Tetram Hivios was standing beside her in the gray morning with his hand warm around hers. They stood for a long time in the rain. There was nowhere else they needed to be. There was nothing that needed to be said. There was only this, the well and the water and the rain, and the two of them at the edge of 20 acres of miracle, in the borderland between two territories that were no longer so much at odds, in the early morning of a world that had become, against all reasonable expectations, something she was glad to live in. The rain came down. She lifted her face to it. The iron key rested against her chest, warm with the warmth of her own body, the permanent warmth of something that has found its purpose and fulfilled it. And somewhere below the stone and the earth and the old carved walls of the well, in the deep place that the light came from, the water moved. As it always had, as it always would. For her, and for those she loved, and for those who had wronged her and been forgiven, and for those who would come after them all, long after the names were forgotten, and only the water remained. The water, and the memory of a woman in a red dress, with white hair and still water eyes, who had walked east when the world laughed at her, who had knelt in the dark beside a stranger and chosen mercy before she knew what she was choosing, who had learned the difference between being alone and being lonely, who had loved a king not because he was a king, but because he was, underneath and at last, himself. The miracle had known her before she had known herself. And the knowing, in the end, was everything. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this story. Let us know what you thought of this tale full of emotions and surprises. Tell us your name, where you're watching from, and rate this story from 0 to 10 if it touched your heart. And if you enjoyed the plot, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the amazing new stories coming soon. See you next time.